Thanks to all of you for joining us today to our discussion of the open letter to Angela Merkel and European bonds. My name is Felix Hoffmann, and I'll be moderating from Freiburg, Germany. And I'm glad to welcome our guests and signatories. With us today is Albena Azmanova. She is a political theorist and author at Social Europe. She's from Bulgaria and based in Belgium, I believe. We have Roger Casale. He's a civil rights campaigner and founder of New Europeans, co-hosting today's conference as well, the organization. We have Professor Trevor Evans, whose picture unfortunately you can't see right now, but he's a professor of economics at the Berlin School of Economics and Law and member of the coordinating committee of the European Economists for an Alternative Economic Policy. He's also based in Berlin, Germany, and we have Professor Ulrike Guérot. She is a political scientist and founder of the European Democracy Lab, who are also co-hosting today's conference. And my friend and colleague, last but not least, Andrea Pisauro. He is the initiator and author of the open letter, researcher in experimental psychology at the University of Oxford. Huge thanks from me and Andrea, I assume, speaking on your behalf there, to all our guests for signing the open letter, and particularly Roger and Ulrike, who played an important role in distributing the letter to other European citizens. Thanks to the organizers. I want to give a brief overview to about the letter to the people who might be attending and do not know what it is about. Thanks to the organizers of today's conference, Citizens Take Over Europe, it's the name. We are all here today online as the situation with the global pandemic is still dire. While people are still dying in the thousands and tens of thousands across the world because of the novel corona crisis, governments struggle to cope with this worldwide public health crisis that has caused also one of the worst economic downturns in recent history. Which is why more than a month ago, weeks before the European Council, I think, council meeting, a group of activists came together to formulate the open letter to Angela Merkel. The letter alludes to the historical context of European solidarity, previous economic crises that have been ravaging the world and Europe in particular, the consequences of which have more often than not been devastating. It alludes to great political figures in Germany, including Willy Brandt and Helmut Kohl, who had stood up for pan-European solidarity, and in this vein, of course, urges Angela Merkel to act in European solidarity, support European bonds in any form. There is an important disclaimer there. The in any form, as in the European bonds, as we refer to them, do not represent any form of a particular bond structures, such as eurobonds, corona bonds, or as now approved by the European Parliament, recovery bonds. We are, in the best sense of the word, ecumenical in that regard. The letter is translated into 8 languages, published all across the continent. The initial list of 500 signatories include 2 Nobel Prize laureates, more than 20 members of European Parliament, former heads of the former head of the International Atomic Agency, the General Secretary of the European Trade Union Conference, and hundreds of astute professors, political scientists, historians, economists, intellectuals, authors, activists, and many more, all of us European citizens. Together with this list of signatories of the open letter, we call on Angela Merkel to rise to this historic occasion and create her legacy as another German chancellor who stood for nothing less than European solidarity. Now, the big question, as we also have it in our event description, will European bonds happen? And if yes, so will they give rise to a more united Europe? I think before I hand the floor to the panelists, one quick reminder, we are a bit pressed for time. Hopefully we will manage to address questions from the audience in the end. And also we probably must talk about the elephant in the room. I invite all of the panelists to comment on the recent ruling of the German Constitutional Court, as you see fit and if necessary. First off, unfortunately, I mean, that was in my plan. Unfortunately, we don't have this video, but Trevor, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you too. Perfect. Right, the floor is yours. Keeping the initial question in mind, there has been a historic demand for Eurobonds over the last 12 years. And how did we get from Eurobonds to Corona bonds to recovery bonds, and what is different now? And of course, will European bonds happen in the end?
Okay, thanks. I'm really sorry that you can't see me, or that might actually be a relief for some of you. The history goes a little bit further back. That from the time that the euro was established at the end of the 1990s, there was a very contradictory situation that we had a common money and monetary policy in Europe, but no common fiscal policy, no budget, no ability to finance. And there has been no example of a monetary system in history that has survived where you haven't also had a fiscal capacity. Of course, the neoliberals that were involved in setting up the euro system believe in a system of self-regulating markets, something that has never functioned properly. As soon as problems emerge, you need a state that can intervene. So after the euro was introduced, we had this very sharp fall in interest rates in Southern Europe. Southern Europe grew strongly. It began importing a lot of goods from other countries, including the Northern European countries. And German and French banks lent Southern European countries money in order to pay for exports from Germany and France. And that worked okay up to the financial crisis in 2008. And when the big German and French banks lost so much money in the US, they abruptly stopped all their lending to Southern Europe. And this threw Greece, Spain, Portugal into very deep recessions. And then you got a renewed call from many economists for the urgency of establishing a euro-level budget and euro-level financing through eurobonds. But then, as now, this was opposed by the more financially orthodox countries in the north, Germany above all, but also the Netherlands, Finland, Austria. And eventually, because the crisis then was threatening the future of the euro area, they did set up first a temporary and then a permanent rescue fund, the European Stability Mechanism. And that lent to countries, but with very, very strict conditions that led to a major economic contraction, big increases in unemployment, wage cuts, and so on. And this downturn in Southern Europe. And it's worth contrasting this with the situation in the United States. The crisis 2007, 2008 began in the United States. But there, because the different states of the United States of America have the same money, there is a national budget, there are common bonds, they were able to emerge from the crisis quite rapidly, whereas the euro area without a fiscal capacity was stuck with this major problem. And now that we've got this new massive shock to our economies, some of you may have seen the new EU forecasts that came out on Thursday, expecting a GDP decline of nearly 8% in Europe, with 9 or 10% in Southern Europe. Huge increase in the government deficit expected, particularly in Southern Europe. And once again, we have had this call for a euro-level financing capacity. Some people have returned to call for eurobonds. There have also been some people arguing the very special situation with the coronavirus, advocates something called corona bonds. And in particular, the governments of France, Italy, Spain, and 6 smaller countries have strongly been arguing for the creation of a new financial facility to help the countries that have been hardest hit deal with this. The problem is that with the euro, it's as if all the countries are operating with a foreign money rather than with their own. But all these proposals have continued to be blocked. The Netherlands has been the most vocal, but Finland, Germany, Austria continue to oppose this sort of initiative. They came to an agreement after a very long and contested meeting of finance ministers on the 9th of April to set up a fund which they say is for 540 billion, and that was taken over by the European Council at its meeting on the 23rd of April. But firstly, quite a lot of this money is not new money. Some of it will only be loans. So as with many of these European financing measures, it's a lot of, as one commentator called it, hot air. But much more significantly, it is nowhere near the sort of amount that is necessary. And so we've had, in the last few days, I work in Germany now, there's been one statement by the leaders of 7 major research institutes calling for the issuing of €1 billion worth of bonds with long maturity. One of the former members of the Council of Economic Advisors here in Berlin has published a proposal calling for a fund with 1.5 to 2 billion euros, 10 to 15% of GDP. And what's clear is there is a need for a massive program of financing because countries in the euro area are indebted as if in a foreign currency. They cannot issue the money as the United States can. And ironically, the European Central Bank is once again been expansive, and Christine Lagarde, the head of the European Central Bank, herself yesterday called for stimulus. I'm sorry, were you trying to call me to a stop there?
Yeah, because that's actually a really good point to move on to the next question, which I wanted to ask Ulrike. Because of that shift that you have probably alluded to with the German economic institutes and economists calling for European bonds, and there is a shift in public opinion perhaps to be observed in Germany. Now, the question that I wanted to ask Guérot is that if there is Germany, the Netherlands, and Finland and Austria having been the countries mostly opposing the European bonds, I wanted to ask Ulrike if she can give us a broad overview of the German political sphere, the political space, and if she thinks that initiatives such as our own, our letter, and others have had a significant impact on the political sphere and the acceptance of European bonds and debt.
Ulrike, if I may just make a technical note for Trevor. Trevor, if you would like me to make you a panelist, you would need to log back in through a link that I just sent you. I don't want to interfere or take up time. If you're happy simply to speak without being seen, we can go on. But if you really want to turn your video on, then just leave the event and join back in through the link that I've just emailed you. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Ulrike, you have the floor.
Okay. So thanks for all these introductions. And to make a long story short, we are discussing since 30 years about the same thing. If you go back to the Maastricht Treaty 92, you go back to the Schäuble-Lamas co-European paper claiming in 94 for fiscal, social and budgetary union. If you go back to the discussions of the 90s, where the French would always argue for gouvernement économique and the Germans would always argue for political union, we are basically 30 years far in history, but we still didn't solve the basic problems. And it has been said by Trevor, I won't repeat, but it's still important. We have created a currency zone with only one leg. The leg is the monetary one. The fiscal, social, budgetary leg is missing. We planned to do it. Since 30 years, we didn't do it. The problem today in Germany is that there are ever fewer Germans who can recall that that is what Germany once wanted to do. In the meantime, the world has changed. China came in, the US went out, populists were arriving, new people took over government, whatever. 30 years is Germany's unified, is a different country. So the German memory, to go back to the 89-92 moment, where we basically said we do the monetary union now and then we do fiscal, social, and so on force. This is 30 years ago. And you have, I would say I could call on my hand the people in Germany who still remember. So you have completely shifted public opinion. And the problem, to be very precise and to go straight into the Verfassungsgerichtsurteil sort of thing from 3 days ago, is that because public opinion has been told for years, which is not true, that Germany is always paying for all the others, and that we are the best and the others are not so good, and the Italians especially, and all these crap things. But, you know, if you say things repeatedly enough, people start to believe it, and now, a decade later, we believe it, right? Most Germans believe that if we go for eurobonds, we are mutualizing debt, and we pay the debt for the others, and still there is Article 125 of the Maastricht Treaty around, which is the no bailout, no bailout. So, I think Germany is really squeezed. And the ugly situation is that the judgment of the court, which basically goes against the ECB printing money or monetarizing, this judgment comes at a moment in time where 6 weeks ago we had a little opening for bonds. You remember in the first moments and days of the crisis, 21st of March, you had these German economists, by the way, liberal economists like Clemens Fuest or conservative economists like Mr. Hüter, who for the first time would say, look, now COVID-19, we need to come out together. There's no other choice than bonds. And so what I would say is that in difference to, say, a decade ago, 2009, 10, 11, where you had strong majorities against eurobonds or corona bonds or bonds, this time the public opinion mechanism and the appreciation in German elites, be that juridical elites or economic elites, that has changed. It has slightly changed for the better. But still, the government today is totally hijacked by new conservative forces in the country and hijacked by AfD. And that is why Mr. Oettinger, our last commissioner in the EU Commission, would say that Corona bonds is a program for the AfD. So we are in a complicated discursive landscape here. And here's my point. The real problem for Germany, I think, is that it will do something because smart people in this country have understood that we need to do something, we can do something, we are a rich country, and we are stabilizing the currency and the single market we're living in. But it needs to come through the back door and not the front door. And so between the choice that obviously there is no democratic space in Germany to go for a broad and open discussion about fiscal union or fiscal federalism, European-wide fiscal federalism, because this is a taboo discussion. You need to shift everything through the back door, so you need to squeeze it through the monetary door. I think that this is perfectly dishonest. I also think that it has repercussions on people to not say, to not go through the front door and say, look, that's what we need to do. We need to create that second leg of monetary union. I think it will backfire, and it already backfires, but it would explain why you get no, say, bold answer from the Germans at this stage of history, say, okay, let's embrace fiscal, social union, all these things we're discussing. Where the Germans are wavering always up to a point, we do something to stabilize the system so that the system does not fall apart without going through the front door. The answer then is we will never get bonds because it's not doable, but you will always go to a level of everything but bonds. The German politics is everything but bonds. And I know, or at least that's how I understood the things, and that's why I would ask Andrea, the Italian. But the Italian, I think, position is the opposite. The Italian want now the marriage promise, bonds and nothing else. And the Germans are saying everything but bonds. And the real question is, can we get through the Rubicon?
Andrea, do you want to have the floor for a minute? Yeah, please come in.
It's a question. Ulrike put forward the question of the European Union on the present stage. We had this domestic question in my household because the letter that we discussed together was written by me and my German girlfriend Nina, which is sitting next to me right now. And we had discussed the letter for quite some time. And we did so because we saw what was the mood in Italy. And let me speak for a minute about the mood in Italy. We saw in the past 10 years, since the debt crisis in 2008, a growth of Euroscepticism, which was widespread, particularly in some in the right, of course, we know about Salvini, but also in a fringe in the left. What we saw after the start of the coronavirus crisis is that sentiment became hegemonic, even in parts of society in which were Europhile. And that was extremely worrying because the European Union cannot allow, where we already have Brexit, we cannot allow another situation like that. So, of course, for Italy, it's an existential problem now. We want this step forward in the integration process. Now, I understand the argument that Ulrike make about the backdoor. I understand the political process, and I understand also the historical situation in Germany. So, in fact, I put back the question to her in a way, or to the audience. We put forward this letter, which was trying to be open and honest about where we are in the European history and how we need to react, which is a collective reaction which needs to have eurobonds, because all the economists which are sensible and understand the economics of the problem say so, and we cannot repeat the mistakes of the past. I think that Ulrike is right. We need to have a discussion which is open also in Germany. We tried that with the letter. The question I asked the floor is, should we insist, not with this letter, but with another letter, but with making the debate open in Germany, making aware the German public that there is a pressure, not just from Italy, but from a widespread set of countries, from a European civic society, from economists. How can we win this argument? And I make a point about time, and then I shut up for some time. This doesn't need to happen tomorrow, but it needs to happen in the next few months. If not the first Eurobond, at least a commitment that this is something that we see a path, that we can envision a process that brings to that. And this is crucial. For it, I think Italy can live with the beginning of a path, with a commitment for some time, but we need to see that initial step. And is the open way the way? That's my question for the other panelists.
Do we have any panelists that directly want to answer to Andrea now, or? Yeah.
Well, I think the Germans are wise enough to always keep the system, I mean, to not let it go. I mean, if Andrea says you want to sign that there's an opening, I think you will be seeing signs for opening. And that's the good news. The good news is first that we have been seeing many economists this time arguing in favor. The second good news is that we will have the German presidency, and there will be a lot of pressure on the German presidency. And the third, and perhaps ever best good news is now there are German industrials basically claiming for European bonds. And so if it comes through the door of the economy, and you would see in the next, say, 6-7 months, a situation in which you have big industry bosses saying that this is needed, it's a different situation than if only civil society asks for bonds. Yeah. So having said that, I think we are in a crucial moment. We are not yet seeing the price tag for COVID-19. We are seeing just an idea of the price tag. We are not yet in the United States. We are not, yeah. So I want to see us in September. I want to see the price tag. And I'm very fearful about the reaction in front of the price tag, yeah? Because this sort of, everybody is on its own sort of sentiment. The moment the price tag will be visible might be a very, very crucial moment. I'm still having, and perhaps that's the only answer I can give you, I'm still having confidence in the elites of my country that if push comes to shove, they know they have to lose a lot, because it's not to pay for the Italians, but it's stabilizing the single market and the currency we are living in. Yeah. Having said that, we are in a different situation with Italy, because if the UK did the Brexit thing, the UK is not in the euro, not in Schengen, and even cannot leave. I mean, we disputed 2 years how the UK will leave, and we don't even know. So imagine the situation that 50% of Italians now say, I want to exit the European Union. But how you exit the euro, it's quite a different pair of shoes. And we experienced it a decade ago that cannot, if Greece could have left the euro, Greece would have left the euro. It just was not possible. There was always this saying, you cannot bring scrambled eggs back to eggs, right? So with Italy, the question is even more bigger dimension, yeah? And because of this, I think what we are doing just now and here on the 9th of May with this tremendously successful Citizens Take Over Europe action is build up pressure, build up pressure. I have the feeling that the pressure can be built up. I think there is our role, and I honestly would say that German citizens are much more in favor and accessible to these things than German politicians. So that is my hope. If we build up enough and careful pressure, perhaps we can bring the government to the signs that Italy needs. But by the same moment, Conte would need to give us signs that if we deliver, we are not Salvini governing and the mafia governing Italy.
Yeah, thanks, Ulrike. Actually, after this nice exchange about the situation within Germany and the likelihood of eurobonds happening from this place, Albena wrote in the Social Europe about a paradigm shift on a European scale, alluding to the ventilator scheme and the SURE program, the support to mitigate unemployment risk in an emergency. I would like to bring Albena into the discussion and ask her to elaborate and how bonds fit in this context. Albena, you are muted, unfortunately. One second. You can unmute yourself by just hovering over the screen. Yeah.
Can you hear me now? You can hear me? Okay, I can. All right. So, very well. So let's make it clear that the idea of European bonds, even in the ad hoc short version of the Corona bond, is not just about short-term solidarity in terms of crisis. It is a bigger ambition. I see it as a bigger ambition, and this is about changing the policy rationale of the EU. And this is what I call a paradigm shift, where we could be actually seeing it happening, despite the resistance against the bonds that we are proposing. So the real issue now is not about more democracy, more sovereignty, less sovereignty. It is about something very different. It's about how public authority, both at EU level and at national level, can deliver socially responsible rule. That is a rule which takes into account the social consequences of economic policy. Let me explain that very briefly. Until now, the EU has been dedicated to market integration in its domestic policy and to market opening in its foreign economic policy. Now, the social consequences of this predominantly commercial policy logic have been devastating, as cuts to public services and social spending were made in the name of EU competitiveness in the global marketplace. That has been the rationale until now. It is time to abandon this logic. Unless the EU assumes functions oriented directly towards the care for our common public welfare, to the creation of European public sector of both public services and even, I mean, imagine that, public enterprises. So fully fledged public sector, European societies will fail. That is why ultimately it is not about solidarity between rich and poor, it's about sheer rationality, it's about self-preservation. So now, curiously, maybe I'm too optimistic, but it seems to me that such a policy shift is about to happen. Now, after the eruption of the pandemic, we saw the European Commission jump in, organize successfully a procurement scheme for life-saving equipment. It created a stockpile of essential medical equipment, It launched, curiously, the unemployment reinsurance scheme, and note that is to be financed through bonds issued by the EU itself. Not very big scale, but that's a step in the right direction. Thus, the Brussels bureaucracy that we have been so much derided for its infamous, red tape and cumbersome decision-making, it is providing leadership. It is providing leadership towards social policy. So social safety net, strong public healthcare system, this is the way we want to go. So, and even I would stretch it a bit further. It is not beyond, okay, how should I put that? This is not about ensuring the level playing field among members, which has been the raison d'etre of the EU governing bodies until now. It also surpasses the very simplistic idea, or the minimalist idea, of social justice as a wealth redistribution from rich to poor, right? That's the most simple idea of social justice, which is of course important. We cannot do without it, but we could see it as a move towards something more ambitious, building a robust public sector at the heart of a revived welfare state. Now that would be the revolution we want. This time it would be a trans-European welfare state. So the aim is now to push further in this direction, in this paradigm shift, from the vision of a Europe as a vast free market to that of a union with substantial and jointly funded public sector. This is, in my mind, what the proposals for eurobonds stands for.
Thanks. I would also like to bring our last guest into the discussion, Roger. Ulrike has already talked about it. Now we've also heard it from Albena in a different context, that the future might very well look like more integration, such as we actually see between activists, between people joining today's conference. Could it be that, for example, 2,500 European citizens signing the open letter to Angela Merkel already is a sign in itself for further European integration, even if we leave the political economic sphere of actually achieving European bonds to the side?
Well, I think the short answer to that is yes. Good evening, everybody. And that's why we are holding events like today with such energy and with such passion and with such determination. It's why New Europeans was very happy to get behind Andrea and Nina's letter. And yes, we absolutely have, as citizens, to take our responsibility seriously for the future of Europe, to come together, to unite, and to not just say, what we want, say what we're prepared to do to make that happen, what we can do for our country, Europe, not just what we want our country, Europe, to do for us. And so, congratulations to everybody who's helping to make today such a great success. I think unity is absolutely the watchword. And as I understand your question, Felix, at the start, it was, could Eurobonds lead to more unity? Well, I think it could, and that's also a reason why a lot of people support it, quite apart from the fact that we need it from an economic and a social point of view. But to pick up the sort of eggs analogy that Ulrike introduced, she talked about scrambled eggs. There's also the phrase, can you take the milk out of the coffee? I think there's a chicken and egg situation here when we think about Eurobonds on the one hand and European unity on the other. Because I think we won't get Eurobonds unless we have European unity. And let's remember that Europe, when we talk about Europe and the Union, we're talking about three unions. We're talking about a union of nations and states. We're talking about a union of markets and money. And we're also talking about a union of citizens. And I think that if we have a strong unity at the level of citizens, then maybe we can push forward this idea of Eurobonds, because it won't surprise you that I agree with a lot of what's been said on this conversation, and it's always, it's a great opportunity. Thank you for involving me in this conversation. Always wonderful to see Ulrike, and very nice to meet Albena and the others and Trevor on the conversation. And Ulrike also mentioned Christine Lagarde. I think Trevor did too. And what Christine Lagarde, I watched her speech yesterday, and of course, yes, she did call for more of a fiscal impulse, fiscal union. She called for a swift, a sizable, a symmetrical response. We're talking about 1.5 trillion, potentially 1.5 trillion euros. The American Standard Comics would say pretty soon we're talking about serious money. But I think even that is just a start. I mean, the size of the crisis is absolutely enormous. And we need a big, bold response. And as well as talking about the need for a fiscal stimulus, she also talked about two other things. She talked about, well, she talked about lots of things, actually. She said, we need to hear the voice of the citizens. There needs to be a new social contract. And we need to think about using the money that we raise, whether it's through Eurobonds or in any other mechanism, wisely. And of course, we can actually use the money to do lots of the things that we've been wanting to do, whether or not there had been a COVID crisis or not. Because I seem to remember there was something called the Green Deal, the Green Plan. There was that idea of investing in industries that were going to bring about a reduction of carbon. So look at what is happening with the issue of basic income, which started as quite a few years ago. It's quite an outlandish idea to many. And now we see from recent opinion polls that there are very high level of consensus across Europe. Things can change very, very quickly. Eurobonds is not, we talked about it in the 90s. Actually, I remember it, it shows my age. I remember it from the time of Delors and the Delors white paper and the idea of Eurobonds to fund, to deal with European unemployment. And then we had it again with the financial crisis. And of course, again, people say, well, I think I quoted Peter Altmaier the other day saying, I'm still against it, and for the same reasons as before. Well, the message that needs to go to Peter Altmaier, the economics minister, is, well, you may feel that have the same theoretical arguments against him, political ones, but the circumstances have changed. And it's not just your call. And look at what people are saying in public opinion, the Spiegel and so on. So I think things can change very quickly. And I think if we can unite as citizens, and the way to unite citizens, though, is not around the technical details of Eurobonds or anything else, important as they are. It's around values and the values of solidarity. And it's around a bold and ambitious vision for the future, which has to come out of the experience of citizens. And so I think we have, in this crisis, and quite extraordinary opportunity, and I think Ulrike sees this too, and I'd be interested in what the unpublishers think, to really change the world in the way that we would like to see it change, almost a kind of revolutionary moment. I had a little bit of I just finished with this, I had a little bit of a laugh with Laura Sullivan from WeMove.org, who've been campaigning very successfully for a European basic income. She did a tweet about the new bicycle lane in Rue de la Loi in Brussels, and the reaction from the driver community and the Flemish community in particular. And I said to her, every revolution has a bit of a sporting theme. The French Revolution had the tennis court, and this revolution, the symbol could well be the bicycle lane in the Rue de la Loi. Let's take this moment, let's seize this moment as citizens to think not just about where the money's going to come from. And I think, if we unite strongly and if we can get basic income, we can get consensus around Eurobonds. But let's also think about what we want to spend the money on and how we want to transform Europe from below, because this is our moment and we have to seize it. Citizens should take over Europe. That's the theme of today. And I think we start here.
You actually guessed my next question, because Andrea and I were thinking that now that we have all of you in one room here, well, what should be the next steps for our initiative? If you say we should start thinking about where we would want that money to go, be optimistic in that sense about eurobonds, or shall we still focus on eurobonds and achieving that goal initially? We have only 10 minutes left, unfortunately. I wanted to bring first in Andrea to elaborate on that for a second, and then hand back the floor to the panelists, please.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's, I agree with everything which has been said. I just want to say that the Eurobonds from a political and cultural point of view are whatever it takes to preserve the Union. It's a political message to Europeans and to the world that this is the step forward that makes the European Union the project that we're not going back in time, we are going forward. And of course, we need to start asking questions about what to do with the money. I want to take a point that Ulrike mentioned earlier. I would be fine in going through the back door initially, and I think Albena has good reasons for optimism in seeing that some things are happening. And I think that we are in the political situation in which we need to go from the back door to the main door, and from the temporary solutions to the permanent solutions, by creating that kind of pan-European civic movement that brings the discussion forward, not just in the European political space that we all inhabit, all of us that are in this debate today, but that put it in the national debates, because the thing we need to do is also to manage to break the bubble at the national state level. And if there is a resistance in Germany, we all do petitions and we try to act as Europeans in the German debate. The same should happen, of course, in the Netherlands, in Finland, and everywhere it's needed. We need to win the argument everywhere is needed. And I see there is also questions from Virginia in the chat that asks about coordinating different petitions, and Virginia was the coordinator of the We Move EU petition, which was also asking for Corona bonds. She's absolutely right. I just want to mention that myself, Felix, the open letter to Merkel, tried to reach out to other petitions and campaign. We even published a joint statement with the petition Europe a Patient. I think we need to do better in coordinating these initiatives, but I promised to Virginia that I'll get in touch with her to imagine together the next steps and to keep everyone on board, because we need to make sure that this is what we do. And I think I want to leave space to the other panelists, so I'll stop here.
I saw Ulrike raise the hand, but I first quickly wanted to bring back Trevor into the discussion because I so rudely interrupted him in the beginning. Trevor, do you have a word of advice for the open letter and the next steps that we should take?
Well, I mean, clearly the situation of the crisis is provoking questioning and criticisms of the neoliberal model, and in a very limited way, Mrs. van der Leyen has been doing that with the moderate Green Deal. One sees something like the Financial Times seriously questioning the market model and arguing that that things have to change, something that one wouldn't have expected. But I mean, until now, I mean, Germany has been this massive beneficiary of the European Union, and the question is, and the monetary union, building up this huge surplus along with the Netherlands. I don't know if any of you saw it, but 2 weeks ago, Munchau, who writes a column in Monday's FT, thought that Germany would hang on absolutely until it looked as if the euro was on the brink of breaking, and then it would be forced to accept support for something like euro bonds. But we saw the speed with which the Social Democratic finance minister dropped his firm adherence to zero deficits and has mobilized huge sums of money, mainly as loans rather than spending. But clearly there is a massive concern there. And I mean, in the past, the European Union or the European community before it have often advanced through crises. It's crises that have forced them to take a step forward. But at the moment, the balance of forces is not that much in favor, apart from this terrible threat of the possibility of it breaking up with the absolutely massive costs and chaos that would provoke.
think we lost Felix at a crucial time. And
Yeah, it could be that Felix dropped off. Does anyone want to lead the discussion to the next location?
I'll try. And I think Ulrike is already starting talking, so maybe you
can have a last word, and then I need to sneak out. Roger said the Germans have been so much benefiting. That's not true. Not Germany. Parts of Germany. The German export industry, some elites, some banks. Which is the essential problem? Statistically, Germany has been privileged over a decade, but many Germans have had the perception that they have never ever been benefiting from the euro, including my own mom. Yeah, it's important. The Gauweiler complaint at Karlsruhe is because citizens had too low interest rates. That's important. If you have little savings and you are a low income person, low interest rates destroy your life. So the first thing is wrong to say Germany has been. There's no such thing than Germany. There's German export industry, German banks, German citizens. So second, I would like to go back to Albena. Super, I totally agree, public goods. If you translate public goods back to Latin, res publica, you end up in talking about a different thing than a single market. You talk about a republic and a political community which is not driven by a market, but you talk about a political community which is there to organize the public good. And that's why we need bonds. Totally agree. But here's my thing. You probably have read Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort, the person's name we don't ought to pronounce. Who says eurobonds says taxation. If you say taxation, there's no taxation with representation. If you say representation, you say legitimacy. If you say legitimacy by the citizens, you say that there's no such thing than citizens without a state. The state is the thing we do not dare to pronounce. You say eurobonds, you say tax, you say citizens, you say European state, you say public goods. Without that, it's going to be very, very tricky. And I think the bolder we can shape these arguments, the better it is. Because I'm still convinced that most European citizens, and with most, I mean a plurality of, say, 60-something, 2/3 of European citizens would go with us through that door. Timothy Garden-Ash, who has been on our call this morning, had a polling where he says that 72% of European citizens as of today are in favor of a European basic income. So we do have, I agree with Roger, we do have large majorities for basically a different Europe, a social Europe, for bonds that finance the public good and the whole thing. The real thing is, if we want to be honest and go through the front door, you need to say bonds, taxation, legitimacy, citizens, state. We can be slow about this to make the arguments. We do not stumble through the door, yeah. But I think if there's something like civil society who speaks up, au fur et à mesure, like the French say, peu à peu, yeah, we should get for the preparation of these arguments. And if you talk about the state, just be reminded that all states in modern history in Europe are constituted as republic. Austrian Republic, Bundesrepublik Deutschland, République Française, Repubblica d'Italiana, Rzeczpospolita, and so on and so forth. So there is something to look into in the terminus of republic. I'm very sorry, but I'm moving out. Okay. Thanks for the letter to Bundeskanzlerin Merkel. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us tonight. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, we have to wrap up, I think. Omri is already coming online with this video. Roger and Albena, yeah, like
I just come in just for Ulrike's evening, just to salvage my reputation with all my friends in Germany, where I lived for many, many years and speak German. I'm not sure if anybody said that on this conversation that Germany has been benefiting too much, but if anybody did, it certainly wasn't me. And if I came across that way, I certainly didn't intend that. I think it was actually Ulrike who said that everyone in Germany thinks they're the best, but I think that's a European-wide disease. I mean, I've got a lot of Danish friends, and they think the best. And if you start talking about the British, well, let's not go there. no, I think that I think this is a very, very important moment. I think Ulrike gave a very good explanation of why it is that people who want a more federalist Europe want a eurobonds, because they think it will lead on to inevitably to a more federal Europe. I mean, Andrew Duff was saying this at the Financial Times the other day. I don't think that that needs to be the case. I think we need to reframe the debate, the political debate about eurobonds. We need to stop all this sort of moralizing and politicizing and so on about it. I mean, the hole is very deep. The crisis is very serious. And we need to get the measure of it quickly. And there needs to be something sizable. And I think eurobonds seems to be a very good idea at the right time. And I just say this, if not now, then when? And we need to do it for, you know, we can think arguments get mixed up with each other. The argument about solidarity has a moral dimension to it. You know, we should, these are our European values. But it's also about the resilience of the European project. It's about self-interest and not just the interest of others. And we need to get real about this. And we need to make people understand that if they want the, you know, whether they're Germans or Danes or anybody else, if they want the internal market, if they want the European project to continue, then we need really something very big, bold action now. And you know, and somebody's not got a better idea. Let's do this, and let's also not think that, you know, even if we get eurobonds, and I hope we do, that's the end of it. That's the beginning. Then we go to the next step. But we need something, as Christine Lagarde said, swift, symmetrical, sizable eurobonds and many other things as well, and we have to get on with it. And we need to send a message to our leaders. That's why it's so important for us to be united and to take over and to take over the narrative as much as anything else, to begin with. That, you know, we expect them to get the measure of this crisis and to do so quickly, because the future of Europe depends on it. And eurobonds, if not now, then when?
Yeah. Thanks. One Omri, can you hear us? Do we have time for 3 more interventions, each a minute?
In fact, luckily for you, the next event doesn't actually start for another half an hour, so you do actually have more time.
All right, but we'll still try to wrap it up now and stick to the original timeline. Albena, Trevor, and Andrea, you have the floor. You need to unmute yourself first, Albena.
Can I just say I'm due on in another debate at 7 o'clock, so it's very rude to leave the debate just after you spoke. But Ulrike has set the example, and I'm following her. But unfortunately, I do have to be on another panel at 7. But this has been great. I hope we can get together again soon. And really, really energizing, fantastic. Thank you.
Next time we'll do it for 2 hours. Bye. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, all the best. Yeah. Bye bye.
Thanks for signing as well. Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye everyone. Bye Albena.
Bye bye.
Am I still muted?
No, perfect.
Okay. Yeah. Well. Indeed, I think we should stop this rather weak appeal to solidarity and stress the political common sense of saving ourselves together. This is all I have to say.
Thanks very much. Before Andrea, Trevor, are you still with us?
I'm still with you, yes. I mean,
right.
I thought many of those comments were great, and I would agree with them strongly. I think one of the things about the present situation is that it's an unstable one, even before this crisis broke out. And we are somewhere between a collection of national states and a European state. And that's reflected in the fact that when the IMF publishes its figures for the world economy, it publishes those for Europe twice, once as separate nation states, and once grouping the euro area countries together as a single economy. And that's the ambiguity. We're somewhere in the middle of that contradiction. What we have at the moment is not stable. And the question is whether we and progressive forces can intervene to make sure that the way it moves forward is in a progressive way. And I think certainly that euro level financing with eurobonds is a key part of that, but also extending a real serious democracy to the governing of the euro area and the rest of the European Union is equally essential.
Thanks. Yeah, in a way we are at a crossroad then, either back to the nation state or further integration, if I summarized that correctly. Thank you very much for being with us tonight, Trevor. Thank you for being with us, thank you for being with us, Albena. I hand the floor to Andrea.
Thank you, Felix, for this excellent sharing, and thank you all for supporting the letter. I just want to make a very quick point about where we are in history, because we need to remember that the European Union was created and founded in the aftermath of World War II to think that history should not repeat itself and we should find another way. And if we hadn't done it at the time, if we hadn't created a EU in the 50s, we should do it now, because what we are seeing now, it's a crisis at the same depth and the same wideness, so that we would need to create a European Union if it didn't exist. Now, the problem we have is that we build upon a lot of good work, but also a lot of mistakes that we have seen in the recent past. But we need to be bold. I think we need to insist. We need to move from an age of resistance. For many of us, the past 10 years has been a political moment of resistance in which we wanted to resist a different idea of Europe. Now we need to go from the resistance to the insistence on building this different Europe, because now it's the time. There are all the political conditions, and we see that we already have done some steps, because if you remember where we were a couple of months ago, when even myself, that I am an optimist 24/7, I was a bit pessimistic about the lack of a reaction of a EU level. Now we are in a much better position, but let's keep insisting, because this is the time and we need to keep pushing. Thank you so much, and let's move on to the grand finale of this excellent day. Happy Europe Day, everyone.
Happy Europe Day. Thanks for joining.